If you're looking to do your valve cover anytime soon, then you'll want to stay tuned for the tips that we have in today's video because after just doing the valve cover myself recently, there are a few things that I'm glad that I looked up and a few that I wish I knew prior to even starting it in order to make the valve cover job a whole lot easier. And really quick, let's go through some comments that we have up here. Edkin is saying that he spent more time finding drop manifold bolt than changing the gasket. And he also said, I just changed the oil filter housing gasket and oil cooler gasket right on. Tomorrow's the valve cover gasket and breather hose. What a good timing for tips. Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that the tips that we have here today are going to be useful for you. I'm hoping to have that valve cover video out in a couple days, so it might be a little bit too late for you, but I'm pretty sure that you have it. There's enough material out there that you can get through it easily. You don't need my video at all in order to get through this job. There's so much good material out there already. But that's, I don't know if you're like on your winter break from work or school, but that's a pretty good task in like less than a week to cover all those gasket jobs. So good job. Now, the first thing that we have up as far as our tips here is going to be the sequence. Sequence. I would say one, if you're just changing out the gaskets, you'll want to remember the sequence because it is a plastic valve cover after all. So when we're unbolting it to make sure that it comes off evenly after all the heat cycling, the plastic can become brittle. It can become warped. I would generally say one valve cover, in theory, in ideal conditions, should be able to go through two gaskets. So one gasket change, the one that it originally came with, as well as the second one that you're going to put on. Now, I will say that wasn't my experience. My car only has about 70,000 miles or so, and I was not able to reuse my valve cover. I still had the leak, or it continued to leak, I should say, even after changing out the gasket. But I would say if you track your car, if you're in extreme weather, then you probably would want to consider changing out the valve cover. But if you do plan to reuse it, just make sure to follow the sequence. There are 26 bolts, and it's kind of easy once you study it enough, or if you mess up a couple times in your video and you do the sequence all over again. So the first two are really easy, and the back ones, they're always relatable. They always end in two, or sorry, they always start with twos. So the first one we have here down in the, if you're looking at it from the passenger side, so you're on the passenger side fender and you're looking at the engine just like this. One is going to be the bottom right corner. And I should say the best way to think about this is think about it in terms of front. So the front of the car is where like our 1 as well as the 20 through 22 through 25 are. That's going to be the front. The rear is going to be the 2, the 26, and the 20. This is the ones in the back crevice that we have to remove the covers or the battery terminal guide in order to gain access to 20 and 26. So we have front, back, we have top, which is going to be pretty much everything that's not in the bays of the fuel injectors. So we have our spark plugs down here. Those are going to stay in there. We have our ignition coil. So that's going to be the middle section. And then the bottom is going to be our 16, 15, and 19. So we have front, back, top, middle, and bottom. And so we're always going to start at the bottom right at 1. Then 2, we go to the back. 3, we're going to attack the middle. And this one is relatively easy because 3 and 4 are kind of on the like middle outside area, 3 and 4. Then we go down to 5 and 6, 7 and 8. We pretty much go right through the middle. So we hit the 2 corners and then we go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right in the center of the middle portion of the engine. Then we go to the back middle, 8, 9, and then the front middle, 11, 12. 13, we go to the top, as well as 14. Then we drop down to the bottom at 15 and 16, come back up for 17, 18. 19 is the corner one next to our first bolt. Then 20, this is the trickiest one to get to. 20, you're going to need a 1/4 inch E10 as well as a wobble extension. You don't need a swivel if you have those two things. So a 1/4 inch E10, it's kind of hard to get, but I'll link one in the video description as well as the comments. I'll pin it as for the ones that I used. And a swivel extension, that's the easiest way to get to 20. And what I would recommend is, as soon as you have access to 20, put your 1/4 inch E10 on the wobble socket, get it in there. Everything else you can get to with a 3/8 E10 and you don't even really need a wobble extension or a swivel. You can get it with a straight extension. The only one that you absolutely need a wobble extension on is 20. That is the hardest one to get to. And when I did it in sequence for the torque, all I did was bump it up to 9 Newton meters versus 8.5, which is everything else, to accommodate for that off angle. Then from 20, we're going to go to 21, back up to the top, and then 22 is on the opposite end of the top, and then we're going to roll down the front of the engine to 25, and then our very last bolt is 26 at the back. So the battery terminal guide or cover, that's going to cover up 20 and 26. So these ones you can't get to unless you have that cover removed or lifted up, I should say. Just remember the sequence if you're going to keep or reuse your original valve cover and just change out the gasket, and especially when it comes down to torque. So what I would recommend is, as soon as you've put on the new gasket or the new valve cover, seat all your bolts. Like, don't tighten them down, but just thread them in. Thread them down in sequence. It'll kind of help you to remember it. You do this enough times, you'll remember the sequence. So just kind of give it a twist, like maybe 3 threads, get it started. And then from there, I would say like go until like you meet resistance, or if you have an electronic ratchet, like the Milwaukee, it doesn't matter which ratchet because all of them don't have that much torque behind them. Kind of go halfway on the trigger pull, and then as soon as it stops, stop. Go in that sequence, and then from there, torque. You'll realize that even at 8.5 Newton meters, when that electronic ratchet stops, you'll still have a few twists with your torque wrench. And so it's not perfectly synced down yet. So at this point, there's no risk of over tightening, of lopsiding the gasket or the valve cover. If you just use a low torque tool or even a hand tool, as soon as you start to meet that resistance, stop. And then as soon as you're done with these 26, then you go in there with your torque wrench. So it should be 3 tightening sequences. 1, just thread them in. Just make sure that your valve cover is on, and that, I would say at this point, do a check. Check that the gasket is fully seated. Go all the way around as much as you can to make sure that the gasket is fully seated correctly. Once it is, go around to just seat them in more or less fully, and then torque. The second tip that we have up is clean. Clean, clean, clean. And I'm not even talking here yet. Before we even get to cleaning our mating surfaces for our gasket, we need to clean one step prior to this picture. So imagine that this gasket was still back on. In this case, it's fine if you pull off the ignition coils. So if we were to put back on this gasket, take off the ignition coils, what I would do at this point, before you remove the fuel lines, is use air. If you have shop air, compressed air, an air blower, blow all the dirt out of there. That way, there's no risk of it getting in the engine bay or in your fuel lines, even worse. Do that. And then once you've done that, then you can go ahead, remove the fuel lines, cover them, pull off the valve cover, and then we can get to this part, which is cleaning the mating surface, making sure that it's spotless. This person did a really good job. So no like oil crust, no oil residue, nothing. We want it perfectly clean. And what I did to clean this for myself was I just used some heavy duty degreaser, and I diluted it like 2 to 1, 2 parts water, 1 part cleaner. So it's really diluted. Just a bunch of shop rags, and I like the white ones versus the red ones from Harbor Freight or anywhere actually, because I found that the red ones, they leave that red dye residue, but the white ones, they leave no color behind. So maybe there's a little bit of lint there, but just using that with the degreaser, or just using the rag at first and then the degreaser with the rag, really helped out. Then go in there afterwards with just a small Scotch-Brite pad, and I cut this up pretty good. I probably cut this up into like 2, not even 2x1s, like probably like 1 by 1.5 squares or rectangles, and then just cleaned the mating surfaces for our gasket. Just get in there, and my reasoning for using this stuff is, one, this degreaser that I have here, and I'll link everything in the description. This is actually safe for restaurant use. So restaurants can use this in terms of their pots and pans. This specific Scotch-Brite pad is safe enough to be used on non-stick pans. So if it's safe enough for those materials, if it's safe enough to be used on cookware, then it's safe enough for our engines. It's safe enough or soft enough in the case of the Scotch-Brite to be used on our engines. So that's my reasoning for using this stuff. If it's safe enough to eat, if it's safe enough to use for that cookware, then it should be good for us to use in this application. Now we have our fuel lines. So I hope that you don't have to clean this, but one of the things that I've seen on a lot of videos is that people will fix our valve cover, or fix their valve cover. They'll fix the oil filter housing gasket, the oil cooler gasket. They'll do all of these things, but more so with the valve cover. And they'll cause another leak, and it's with the fuel lines. And I understand these are hard to get to. You know, we want to use a line wrench and all those things, and you can always try to go by feel or whatever. But in this case, I would say if you're fixing a leak already, don't open yourself up to the potential of having another leak because you didn't tighten down the fuel lines correctly. And in order to tighten these down, you are going to need a 14 millimeter for the 6 small rails, and then the 17 for the main one, at least on the M235i. Torquing them down to spec is, one, it's going to make sure that it's tightened down correctly. It's not over tightened. It's not under tightened. We all know the importance of torquing it down, but making sure that this doesn't happen is going to be the most important. A lot of people will say good and tight is fine, and sometimes that's all right. Like these, it's a T25 that's underneath this wiring harness for the O2 sensors. Like good and tight is fine for that because it's just holding a bracket in place, right? And the the connectors there, they're not too heavy. They're not really going to move. There's a little locking tab there. It's not really going to move around too much. The oil cooler lines, right? There's a little guide there. That's fine for good and tight or not really requiring a torque wrench. Your battery terminal, right? Because it's kind of wedged in there. That's fine for good and tight. You don't need a torque wrench for that stuff. But this stuff, it's carrying fuel. If you get fuel on your ignition coils, they're gone. If you get fuel through the wiring system, it's going to be a bad day for you. It's going to prevent this from having a good contact. And plus, you're going to add fuel to a hot engine bay. I just want everybody to be safe, right? I don't want anything bad to happen to anybody. So one of the things that I made sure before I attempted this job and before I felt confident and reassured enough in myself to share this information with other people is that I had to get a set of crowfoot wrenches and I had to tighten these down to spec. And that's why I said, if you can't afford the whole set or whatever, but a lot of them are pretty affordable now. Like you get cheap ones for like a whole set for like maybe $10 or $20 on Amazon. But making sure that those fuel lines are tightened down is going to guarantee your safety, as well as make sure that you don't have this kind of leak. Another thing when it comes to these fuel lines is that when you're getting them on, so you take them off. Taking them off is really not that big of a problem. You can still use a crowfoot wrench and then just spin it off by hand. But when you bring them on, they are under a little bit of tension. So if it feels like they're not really threading on, just press down on the line and then it should thread in fine. And then same thing for the main line. It might not feel like all that tight and that might seem like, yes, of course that's what you would do. But just in case you run into the same thing, like, by this point, by the time that you're tightening down the fuel rail, you're probably at least an hour in. It's towards the end of the job. Maybe you're doing it right off of work, so you're a little tired and you're like, why is this not threading on well? And this is exactly what happened to me. I was like, how come it's not threading on well? And I was like, oh, because this kind of rubber guide here or whatever is kind of pushing the line up. So in order to make sure that it threads on easier, you just push it down a little bit. And our third tip is get as much space as you can for this job. Talking about those oil cooler lines right here, it's a 10 millimeter in the front, and then that bracket in the back there that the 10 millimeter is being attached to, that is held in by a T25. So in this BMW diagram that we have up here, it's going to be parts 10, 11, 12, and I believe 13 is the sleeve for the 10 millimeter bolt. You'll want to take all that stuff out. That way you can manipulate these hoses. Because when you're here, this oil line right here, the one that bends to the back, that's going to catch on that corner of the valve cover. If you have this attached, one, it's attached to the valve cover. So you won't really be able to get it off because it's going to yank your lines at the same time. But if you kind of try to cheat and just remove the 10 millimeter, that little L bracket, it's going to catch. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult because you have just a little bit of room just to kind of manipulate that line, press it out, and get that corner out. When you guys see the video, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. And it's going to be the same thing when you get it back in. That little bend, that 90-degree bend right there is going to be more or less your hiccup. So getting access to that on the front end is very important on getting out the valve cover and putting it back in. The other thing I would say is I've seen some people like be a little lazy with it and keep on their cowl paneling, the weather gasket. Take it off. Take it off. Don't try to like shimmy it back and then shimmy it to the front when you're trying to get it on or off. Just take everything off. So you can see like the big difference here, right? So look at, we have access. This is basically like if you're doing your spark plugs. uh, we have full access to ports 5 and 6. Here, we have access to port 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 if you're lucky. There's no way you're getting to 6. So all this cow paneling stuff, take it off. Take it off. Move the battery terminal over. That's what this silver line is on the page. And then we also have another line right next to it. Get it all off. Get it all off. Give yourself that extra access so you can just drop it right in. There is going to be a little bit of a shift that you have to do to bring it forward and then bring it back, but it's so slight versus having to shift over like at least 1/8 of the valve cover back and forth. Plus, then at that point, you're going to be kind of fighting with your air intake. Here, it's relatively easy. Small shift, and boom, you're good to go. And our very last tip is going to be the cover or the gasket. And we alluded to this a little bit in the very beginning. And I would say if you can't afford the OEM one, that's fine. It is pretty expensive. It's like $600 when you factor everything in. But FCP Euro has, I believe, an OE version for like 2 something. And that's what I went with. I understand that I kind of have the leeway because I can write it off and it makes for good content to just get the gasket. But some people out there, you know, times are tough right now. It's holiday season, inflation, all of that stuff. And it's probably like the valve cover and a bunch of other things that you have to do. If you can only get the gasket and it's the first time that you've needed to change the gasket on your car, or this is the second gasket that this valve cover on your car is going to get, I would say take a shot. Take a shot, change out the gasket, see if it works. With the exception to if you track your car, if you have your car in extreme temperatures, maybe if you park your car outside, and if your car is over 100,000 miles, then I would say if you're also kind of trying to weigh in time and specifically shop time, if you're not doing it yourself, just get like the $200 whatever valve cover from FCP Euro. If it leaks, like a lot of people say it might because it's so cheap, FCP Euro has their guaranteed or their forever lifetime, whatever it is, warranty. You can get another one and send your old one back. Not only that, is you have a return policy with FCP Euro. So if it fails, like a lot of people say, usually it'll fail right away. So throw it on as soon as you get it. You know, try to coordinate with your shop or put some time aside as soon as it gets in. Throw it on, run the car, check for leaks periodically all through the return period. And then if it does, then you hit up FCP Euro and you're on your way. Let's see here. Edkin is saying that the kit that I'm talking about from FCP Euro is $342.14. Thank you for checking on that for me. So I don't have to, including the breather hose. Here's what I'll say about the breather hose. If you can, don't get it. It's $70 for that rickety hose. And all that I did was for myself is I kept the ends, right? So I didn't want to attach a silicone hose directly to the valve cover because if I over tighten the hose clamp or just that much pressure there, I didn't want to risk it and have to replace the valve cover just for that. But all I did was mine kind of crumpled. So it crumpled in the middle. And so all I did was I cut the hose so I could retain the adapter portions at the end. I got I believe it's a 19 millimeter inner diameter silicone hose. And don't pay attention to my old video. I've actually been playing around with this for a while now. Don't get the 90-degree bend. get a 45-degree silicone hose, 19 millimeter, same thing. I'll link it down in the description for the one that I used. And this one I actually depicted in the video. Cut it to length and just insert the ends with hose clamps. Now, my smog guy said, you know, I've known him for a while now. He's like, you know, some sticklers at the smog stations could ding you for this. So what you would want to do is run the silicone hose, but run a black one. At the time, all I could find was a blue one when I first did it, but now there are black hoses out with a 45-degree bend with that specific diameter. And use black hose clamps. Or what he told me was, if you can, just before you go and smog it, well, I didn't say where his shop was, but you know, right before you smog it, maybe like you pull around to the corner or whatever, because it's a pretty tight seal. That 19 millimeter inner diameter to the breather hose, it's a pretty tight fit. Just take off the hose clamp. Take off the hose clamp, shove it back in, so it doesn't look, at least like to maybe like the untrained eye or somebody who's just like looking for something really obvious like a hose clamp. If you don't give them something that draws their attention, they're probably just going to glaze over a black hose, another black hose. It could be silicone or whatever, but it's a black hose, right? It's really inconspicuous. Maybe it has a little bit shine to it, but you got to remember, these smog people, yes, they're experienced, but this is what they're doing all day. They're just kind of like shining a light. They're like, oh, okay, like I know what to look for. You know, blue silicone tubing, you know, cold air intakes, you know, cone filters, things like that. But if you just give them a black hose there, a black silicone hose, maybe even with the black hose clamp, you'll probably get away with it. You know, your mileage may vary on that one, but that's what I've been told. So with that, let's open it up for Q&A. I hope that was helpful, especially for you, Edkin, because you're about to do this job. I have the FCP Euro up there specifically for that last slide, but you already ran the numbers for me, so thank you there. Just Blaze, hello, welcome to the stream. Let's see here. Edkin, do you need engine oil prime sequence after changing the valve cover gasket as you do after oil filter housing gasket change? No. So I didn't really do that. And technically, it will automatically do the priming process because you're technically draining the fuel lines when you do the valve cover. So if you're honestly, the way that you did it is perfect. Like if you disconnected the battery from doing the oil filter housing and the oil cooler gasket, and then you went right into the valve cover, technically you don't need to prime because you've drained the fuel out of those lines. So the car is going to kind of need an extra kick in order to, one, circulate the fuel to get to the injectors, but as it's doing that, it's going to prime the engine. Not as much as if you were to do the priming process, but enough. US Vigim, how's it going? Hey brother, out to dinner, told the wife I missed an important meeting. She rolled her eyes. Have a Merry Christmas next week. Thank you for what you do for the tour community. Well, I do appreciate that very much. I hope that you enjoyed your time with your wife, and I hope that just means that she valued your time even more today because you had to miss such an important meeting that you guys had extravagant and extraordinary night together, and I hope that you have a Merry Christmas next week too. Let me know. I know it's only going to be the day after Christmas, but should we stream next week as well? For me, I know that there's not going to be that much traffic on the roadway. You know, I have my live streaming set up here in the office. I don't mind coming down to the office to stream and hang out with you guys the day after Christmas. Plus, the office is going to be quiet, so the Wi-Fi should be faster as well. So that's always a plus. Steven, finished my oil filter housing gasket and valve cover this weekend. Right on. Thanks for the very helpful vids. Only casualties was the intake turbo inlet pipe. Yep, of course, that one's always gonna give us trouble. That I broke the breather hose connection on. Okay, no problem there. Like I said, I will link it, or let me see if I can find it even. Now you guys are going to get an insight into what I've been buying lately. This is it. I'm actually going to do another one for my dad's car, so I picked up another one, but this is the exact one that I have. And another thing that you guys want to do is learn from my mistake, and don't use scissors, even shop shears. Get a proper hose cutting tool like this, and you'll have clean cuts from for your silicone hosing. If it's just the hose that's damaged, salvage the ends, put them on that hose, and you're good to go. If the hose is like broken but still kind of there, just use it to kind of size up. I would say give yourself a little bit of leeway there because it bends out. So don't cut it exactly the way or exactly to the same size as the OEM hose, because it doesn't manipulate in the same fashion. So cut it, give yourself a little bit of leeway there is what I'm saying. That way you don't have to go out and buy another hose. If you can, salvage the ends, even the breather hose that goes into the valve cover. Mine only has 2 of those locking tabs in place. That's fine. The O-ring is going to hold it in place, and it's kind of loosely held in with that accordion style plastic hose. Once you put a silicone hose on there, because it's much more rigid, it's really just going to kind of press it in there, and it's going to kind of hold it into place a lot better. It's really snug once you put one of these silicone hoses in there. So, yeah, you put that on there and you're good to go. You'll want to, the best way to size it up if your hose is completely gone is to take the 45-degree bend, put it right at the dip of the valve cover. So when the valve cover kind of, like at the end of the valve cover, this hose actually fits very well into that groove leading from the breather valve. So have it taper off and have the 45-degree bend be your dip down, and that should be a pretty good measurement or starting measurement. Like I said, give yourself extra slack just in case. If you guys want, I can make like a short on the exact measurements that I have. I'll just have to pull it off, but I don't mind at all. Let me know if that's something that you guys want me to do. Let's see here. CTX Tan. Hello, I'm new to your channel. I'm looking forward to replace the oil filter housing very soon on my car, thanks to your videos. Oh, well, thank you very much for the kind words. I hope that it's helpful, and I'm sure that you'll do fine. Even like I said, even without my videos, I made my videos based on a lot of the existing material out there. All that I did at that point was, when I made my video, I was like, okay, everybody has, this angle of removing the valve cover, or when they get to this step, they always have this angle, but I wish it came from another angle. So I make my videos typically with the idea that you're going to be watching other people's videos. So I want to get or give another perspective, another angle, another way of removing said item or putting something on. That way it kind of helps give the viewer a 360 view of things. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of great content out there already. You're in good hands. And with that, we have all of our comments. I hope that all of this was helpful. If there are any other questions, you guys know you guys can always reach me on other socials at VroomTuber. If you guys want, like I said, let me know if you want me to do a video on how to cut this hose, like what the dimensions are, as well as if we should stream this coming Tuesday. Like I said, I don't mind. I don't really have anything coming up. It's the day after Christmas. There's not a lot of traffic. Work is starting to dwindle down already. So I got a pretty light load after Christmas. It's still pretty busy. Not only that but also with the content that has to get produced before Christmas. With that, I hope all of you are. Oh no, let's see here. Edkin, what torque spec for the fuel lines? FCP Euro has this too. If I'm not mistaken, it's like 20 something for the small ones and then 30 for the big one. Right here, 23 for the small ones, 30 for the big one. And then the fuel rail, like the 11 millimeters on the backside that are just mounting it, those get 13 Newton meters. And this is like hand tight. Yeah, this is like one of the ones, it's fine. Like good and tight is fine because, you know, a lot of times when people go by hand, especially if they're using like a 3/8, even like a regular ratchet, and you give it like that full on twist, you're going to hit 13 easily, probably even more. So just be careful on this. Be careful of the inner sleeve. So that 11 millimeter goes through the fuel rail, but it goes through a metal sleeve that is kind of held in place by a rubber grommet. So my recommendation is always use a magnetic 11 millimeter socket, and then with like a magnetic tool, like the ones on the back of the pocket screwdrivers, pull out those metal sleeves and then detach your fuel lines, your main fuel lines, and remove the entire piece. That way you don't lose those sleeves, because without those sleeves, it doesn't give like a firm surface for those bolts to hold on to. It'll kind of, that fuel rail will kind of float in place without those metal sleeves. User one, awesome topic, Fritz. Well, thank you. I hope it was helpful. Yeah, let's see here. Let's see here. N55 fuel line. Let's see here on images. Okay, this is good enough. So right down here, this is where that little rubber grommet is. And then inside that little rubber grommet, you have the metal sleeve. So just be careful for these 4 bolts when you remove them. All right. So it looks like we just got a quick one for us today. If you guys have any more questions, go ahead and drop them in. I'll still try to pull it up. I know I actually almost bought it from FCP Euro. Let's see here. Let's see here. Fuel rail bolt. FCP Euro should have it. Let's do a search. Let's see if it's in my cart still. No. Okay. Yeah, it's a small metal sleeve. The only thing is that it costs like $3. I thought I almost lost it, but magnetic grab tool saved me. Yeah. So those are just the 5 tips that I have for the N55 valve cover gasket or valve cover replacement, whichever one you decide to do. Let's see here. Stay ready. N55 owner, right on. Congrats. Welcome to the live stream. Steve, I lost one of those sleeves. Okay, so I'm not the only. I know I'm not crazy. I didn't see anybody say anything, so I was like, "Am I really the only one?" But Steve said that he lost one of those sleeves on the 11 millimeter. It fell out on the reinstall. Yep, same here. The rest are good and seem to be still holding the fuel rail nicely. Yeah. Now that you said it, I'm going to try to find it. Let's do this. Real OEM. Browse parts, engine. Let's see what we got here. No. Oh, I must have passed it. Cylinder. Am I blind? Well, I know I am blind. I wear contacts and my prescription is not the greatest. Here we go. Let's see. No, not that one. Here we go. Let's see here. Let's see. 3, 4, 4. Number 4. Steve, if you needed a replacement, there it is. For stuff like this, believe it or not, I found that it's oftentimes cheaper to just go to your local BMW dealership. I find that places like FCP Euro kind of have to bump up the price on this to account for the shipping. Now, if you're already buying a bunch of other things from FCP Euro, then it's fine. But if you go to the dealership, this is probably going to be like $1 or $2. I've never seen small parts like this, nuts, bolts, screws, cost actually like whatever FCP Euro charges. And oftentimes you go to the dealership and say like it's $3, right? Maybe it's $2 and some change. If you go in there with like $2 cash and you'd be like, oh, I don't have any change, they can adjust the price because they're giving it to you at retail price. They can always like give a discount as long as they're not going under whatever their wholesale price is. It's fine. So if you go in there with like $2 cash, they'll probably give it to you for $2 cash. Let's see here. Stay ready. This is awesome because I actually have to do this job ASAP. Well, okay, I'll try to get this video out for you. So I'm actually going to do the video. I've kind of lined up some of the timeline, and I hope to have it out in the next couple of days, definitely before the end of this week and before Christmas. That is my goal. And I should be like all the filming's done. Sometimes like I do the jobs and then a shot or two might be blurry. So I kind of open the car back up again to a certain point to kind of recapture the shot. But most of the shots look good so far. And I probably only have like 20% left to go as far as the initial timeline. So hopefully that'll help. So or stay tuned for that. If you want, you can turn on notifications and I hope that it gets to you in time. User 1, at how many miles did you replace the valve cover, just cover, or gaskets? Thank you. So my car is just over 70,000 miles. I tried replacing the gasket like a week or two ago, and it still leaked. I was holding vacuum at the diaphragm, so the port that kind of vents gas in the back. not the breather hose one, but it was holding vacuum just fine. So I was like, okay, you know, this is the first time I need to replace the gasket. It's under 100,000 miles. It's holding vacuum. Let me just get the gaskets. But apparently, I needed a new valve cover. Today is actually the first day that I've driven the car with a new valve cover on. The one that we were talking about from FCP Euro. So I'm just going to add this to cart just in case anyone else asks again. But I grabbed this one for $301. So I grabbed this one for $301. And then I also grabbed these two. You don't really need these E6 Torx because the other ones are still going to cut thread just fine, but it was like $1, so it's like whatever. And definitely you're going to want a new one of these. You're going to want a new actuator seal. It's like $7. So we're talking, this is the OE version, if I'm not mistaken. Quality OEM. Let's see what FCP Euro puts up. What's with these question marks? Okay. Versus getting the genuine one, we're talking like $600. So we're talking like a $200 or sorry, $300 markup by going OEM. You get everything, and this is the kit that Edkin was talking about earlier. Still, the whole kit is much cheaper. Now, if you go genuine, we're talking like $700. This is ridiculous at this point. All of this is backed by FCP Euro. If you want to go with ECS or Turner, because you already have an account with them, I believe they do a lifetime replacement as well. Just make sure that they have the parts. But for me, it's backed by FCP Euro, so I feel confident in getting it. If it leaks or whatever, they'll get another one. It's not like they return your money anymore. You get store credit, but you guys know what I mean. Like there's virtually no risk involved with getting any one of these from FCP Euro because it is backed by their lifetime replacement. So yeah, stay ready when it comes to your question, genuine or OEM, whatever's cheaper on FCP Euro's website. In this case, the OEM is they're giving it a OEM one. So I'm assuming the genuine is the exact same thing with the BMW stamp on it. So if it's the exact same thing minus the stamp, and it doesn't have the stickers, it doesn't have the warning stickers, but if you're smart enough to replace the valve cover, you're smart enough to know that the engine is hot after the car has been running. Sometimes like when they have these disclaimers, like, you know, when they give you the hot coffee and they're like, warning, hot, I'm like, oh, somebody got sued over that. I'm like, somebody really sued over that. And then a lawyer really pursued the case. I'm like, that lawyer should be disbarred for malpractice. Just because some things are so obvious, right? Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation though. But stay ready. Yep. FCP Euro, they have their lifetime warranty and pretty much everything on their website, even their oil, even the coolant. Just send it back, and now you get store credit. So yeah, I would say feel confident if you go with the $300 valve cover. Pick up the extras if you can spare the ends, the attachment points of your breather hose. I would highly recommend doing that, and then just picking up the breather hose, our makeshift breather hose, because there's no other. It's a straight hose. Get a 45-degree bend, cut it to size with the appropriate tool, and call it a day. So I hope that helped. And if there are any other questions, feel free to throw it down in the chat. We're talking about the N55 valve cover. We went over the 5 tips. The first one is getting down that sequence. 2 is making sure that it's clean, not just cleaning the mating surfaces, but cleaning the dust before you remove the valve cover and the fuel lines. And I would recommend, because sometimes the fuel drips down, what I would do is after you've reattached your fuel lines, before you put back in your ignition coils, because those rubber portions of the fuel injectors, they don't like fuel. They could deteriorate. I would say blow, use your leaf blower, shop air, whatever, hit it again. If you have a way of like blowing in some hot air, whether it be like through a heat gun, don't hold it in one place. Just kind of like blow it, right? Just heat up the area. So if there was any gasoline in there, it evaporates out. But unless you're extremely quick with this job, the amount of time, like say some fuel got in there, you remove the valve cover, you clean the mating surface. Just the amount of time that you should spend with cleaning the mating surface should be enough for any gasoline to evaporate. If you got so much in there that it didn't evaporate, just drop in a towel, like a paper towel, and you'll be fine. And then after that, after you clean the mating surfaces, you're going to have to put back on your new valve cover. That takes time. You're going to have to torque in sequence. Remember, when we go in sequence, we're going to want to thread it in, and then we're going to want to drive it down, and then we'll want to torque. That should be more than enough time for any fuel that has been in the area to dissipate. But just in case, once you reattach your fuel lines, hit that area again with air, then drop in your ignition coils. After that, you want to make sure that pulling it out, putting it in, you're going to have enough space. So that means pulling off the back cover, completely detaching the 2 attachment points for the oil cooler lines in the front. And then, of course, you have to decide on if you want the gasket or if you need the valve cover. User 1, how long or what temp do you let your N55 cool down after parking? How long or what temperature do you let your N55 cool down after parking? Well, normally when I park my car on the high end, it could be at 102 water temperature. On the more consistent range, it's anywhere from like 70 to 90, depending on how far I drive. Like when I go, like the gym isn't all that far from my house. So like when I wake up, go to the gym, my car is probably like high 70s, mid 80s, depending on how, if I have to stop at a light for a long time. And then when I leave the gym, the car is still a little bit warmed up. I don't work out for like ever, like an hour and a half. And then when I drive home, car's probably touching 90. But when I drive to work, when I drive back home from work, it can be in the 90s, depending on the weather, 100. Yeah, no problem. No problem, user 1. In general, since it's a turbo, to avoid oil baking in turbo. Actually, the N55s don't have that much blow by. So the breather hose from the valve cover that runs down to the turbo inlet pipe, I would say when you do this job, you might see a lot of vapor on the adapter that attaches to the valve cover because it's right there. If you ever detach the other end, like if you do the turbo inlet pipe, and when you do the turbo inlet pipe, look in your turbo inlet. There's going to be hardly any oil in there. Hardly any. It's not like the N54s and some of the N20s that, throw a lot of oil in there and then they get into the turbo. It's not that big of a concern on the N55. Cool thing. For the oil. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I know the 2 series, they don't have an oil temperature gauge or anything like that, so it makes it difficult. Let me see. Let me see if I can pull up the exact one that I have. This is close, but I think it's more expensive than the one that I have. I know they go out of stock a lot too. But this is essentially it. It's essentially an OBD2 reader. It can do intake air temp. It can do boost pressure. Some of them can do boost pressure. It can, on the BMWs, it can do water temperature, but there's a direct correlation between water temperature and oil temperature. It's like only by like a few degrees. So this is what I have, or similar, plugged into my car all the time. If you want, I'll link the exact one that I have. I'll have to look for it. I'll link it in the description. I'll redo the description as soon as the stream ends. But essentially, this is what I have to monitor my oil temperature by drawing that relationship from water temperature. Just know that this is not exactly oil temperature. It's water temperature, and then you infer what the oil temp is based off of that. Jill, hey, I recently got a message on my M235i saying that drivetrain malfunction. I read the code. It says cylinder 6 misfire. What could be the problem? Spark plugs or ignition coils? Hopefully it's not your fuel injectors, because that would be more expensive, and you need a specialty tool for it. But more likely than not, if you're at that 70 to 60,000 mile interval, cylinder 6, that's the one all the way in the back. What you could do to test it is switch out the ignition coils. I would say switch out 6 and 1. And then if it jumps to 1, you got a bad coil. If it still stays at 6, you could do your spark plugs and then go from there. But if you're already at that point and you're at the 60 to 70,000 mile interval, I would say just drop in new spark plugs, switch your cylinder 6 coil with your cylinder 1 coil, because it's the easiest to get to. And then if you need to, then change out the coils. But if not, then the problem was your spark plugs. And then usually, like, if you pull your spark plugs and you see them, you'll know. So I hope that helps. Right on. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that solves your problem. If you guys have any more questions, it doesn't have to be about the valve cover. It could be anything else. Hopefully, I have the information to answer said questions. But if not, we can look up whatever the problem is, and hopefully we'll find an answer together. But yeah, this is, like I said, the valve cover. Oh, here we go. Jay, thank you so much. Yeah, no problem. Glad to help. Yeah, so the valve cover, I feel so much more, it sounds bad to say, I feel more familiar with it because I had to do it twice, like kind of back to back. I think the second time I did it, when I replaced the entire valve cover, I didn't even check my phone to see what the sequence was. I was like, oh, I already remember it. There's a small pattern to it, right? It kind of alternates. Mike, hi Fritz, I watched your video and really enjoyed it. I have a 2015 BMW 335i F30. Now I'm having an issue with RPM fluctuation. So I haven't had that problem. And I guess depending on what the issue is, RPM, I guess it depends. Like, maybe you could give us a little bit more details, the conditions in which it happens. And then we'll go from there. Let's see here. Shadow D meter 2 is good to monitor car data. Let's look that up. Oop. What did I do? Oh, is that the one that I had up? Oh, oh, this one's cheaper though. Oh, that might be too cheap. Let's see here. Okay, let's take a look. It looks super similar. Oh, this is the same brand as mine. This is probably their new one. Okay, so yeah, so I probably have the meter 1. And I don't mind. Like I actually like that mine is just like orange all the time. The gauge is always orange. It's not fancy like this, but you guys can get the fancy one. I paid about $100 for mine, so this is kind of right in alignment with what I thought. Yeah. Let's look at the seller. Maybe they have old ones still. No. Thought they had like a regular storefront. But yeah, this is nice. $100. I mean, 110, whatever. It's close. It's close enough to mine. I'm pretty sure it's the same. I remember that orange logo though. I'm pretty sure this is the same company that made the one that I have. So mine is outdated, I guess. Honestly, it's not really outdated. It just doesn't look as fancy. But I prefer the analog gauges, so I'm happy with it. Thanks, user 1 for bringing that up. Mike, while the car is coasting around 1,000, the RPM jumps to 1,300, then goes down. You probably have a leak as far as like somewhere within your air intake system. Oh, you're living in South San Jose? Okay. My work is actually not too far from, I mean, I guess it depends where or how far south San Jose you're talking about. My office is actually not too far from PayPal. But as far as your jumping RPMs, F30, you'll either want to, I say check all of your tubing from your intake to your turbo inlet to your boost pipe that feeds into the intercooler, and then check the charge pipe. I'm almost certain that if it's just jumping like that, there's an influx of air that's causing the car to jump RPMs, especially when it's like that. So I would say around 1,000. That's not a lot either. So yeah, check that line. Basically the pathway of air, either something's cracked or something is disconnected, not tight all the way, whatever it is. That would be my best bet. So let's see here. Yeah, I hope that helps for that one. Unless anybody else has any other suggestions for Mike. Again, he said that while his car is coasting around 1,000 RPMs, the RPMs jump to 1,300, then goes down below 1,000 or back to 1,000. I guess I should say. No problem, Mike. I wonder how I get this icon to... Oh, there we go. That looks better. Okay, perfect. So back down to 1,000. So I'm pretty sure there's somewhere in that pathway of air intake, there's a leak. Again, I hope that helps. If you guys have any questions, go ahead, shoot it down in the chat. Again, let me know if we should do a stream on the 26th, so the day after Christmas. Like I said, if you guys want it, we'll do it. I just don't want to trek it down here. Come do a stream, and then I'm the only one here. I would like some company. Let's see here. It does it a couple times. Okay. Yeah, it would be kind of, if it's also, the other thing too is if you're saying that it happens at 1,000. If that's the only constant, like if say like if you're at 1,000 and it does it right away, if you're at 1,000 and it does it like after 5 seconds, if 1,000 RPMs is the only constant, then I'm still really leaning on the fact that you could have a leak there or something. Yeah, if it's infrequent, then yeah, because it could also be that something is loose, and maybe kind of like the force of the air that's being pulled in, or maybe like when things are getting compressed, it could be inconsistent. So yeah, I hope that helps. And then also too is I would love it if you figured out what it was, and then you came back on stream and you let us know, kind of remind us like what the problem was and what you did to fix it. That way other people, if they ever encounter anything like this, they'll be able to benefit as well. But yeah, let me know how that goes out, how that works out for you. And it should, because my dad's F30, it's an N20, had the same thing. Ended up being that the turbo inlet pipe was completely cracked at the portion where it connects to the turbo. So like when you're looking at it, you might not realize it right away. But if you kind of put your hand up there, you realize like, oh, it's not connected. It just kind of mates up to it. So there is a huge leak there. Yeah. All right. So that'll do it for us for today. If there's nothing else, I hope all of you have a good rest of your evening. If you're here in the Bay Area like Mike and I are, then I hope all of you are safe, driving safe in this rainy weather that we're having. I hope all of you do well. Have a great Christmas, and I look forward to seeing all of you next Tuesday.